everyone. I'm back. I know it's been a while. Yeah, sometimes I get kind of discouraged thinking that nobody's watching these, and I know it's heavy material, and I know that it's not easy to watch these. But I got a new subscriber today, and so I felt I kind of owed it to them to make a new video. And so I'd been kind of preparing for it and kind of figuring out what I wanted to say recently anyway, and so I figured this is a good motivation to go ahead and do it. So today, well, first of all, disclaimer, I avoid mentioning names except for my late wife's, Natalie's, because I want to protect people's privacy. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about being in Mexico, and what that was like. As a teenager, my parents decided to be missionaries in Mexico. And what we did is, instead of like being sent by some organization or by a church, they decided to just go on their own. They got a lot of different churches to support us financially. And my dad took early retirement, and he worked for the Pennsylvania State Penitentiary. And so he had a pretty good retirement there. And so between that, we were able to do pretty well living in Mexico. And things are cheaper in Mexico anyway. Always have been. And so I was 13 going on 14, I think, when we moved to Mexico. I had just finished 7th grade. And so 8th, 9th, and part of 10th, I was in Mexico, and we were, my sister and I were homeschooling. This is me and the sister just older than me. And, because I'm the youngest of 7 kids, but most of them were already grown and out of the house. And so it was just the last 2 of us that went along with us, with my parents. So going to a new country is always hard, because there's culture shock. It is very different to go from Pennsylvania, small town, to big city Mexico. We weren't out in the sticks. We were in a big city. The city we went to is called Torreon. It's spelled Torreon with an accent on the O, the last O. And so Torreon is in a dry lake bed, surrounded by hills. And it's actually one of 3 sister cities. Torreon is in the state of Coahuila, but Lerdo and Gomez Palacio are actually in the bordering state that I'm blanking out on at the moment. Been a while. And so it's a huge area that covers, because it's flat, and there's a reservoir up in the mountains. There's a lake that had been dammed up in the, I say mountains, it's hills, up in the hills. And so about once a year during the rainy season, it's not like a monsoon season, but it's definitely a rainy season, and they have to let water out of the dam so it doesn't burst. And so the dry riverbed that the very poor people have been living in, they have little cardboard and corrugated steel shacks that they have built in the dry riverbed. They have to pack up and move before the water comes, and every year people drown. Every year, because they always forget. You cannot swim in that. It's terribly fast, and yeah. You get the stupid people who decide to swim in it, and then you get the poor people who couldn't get out in time. At the very least, the poor people might lose what little home they have. The poor in those cities are far worse off than the poor in the cities in the United States. It's such a drastic difference. There is no middle class, really. You have the poor, the destitute, and the rich. That's pretty much it. I think it's getting better now, but that's how it was back then. This was in the late 80s, late 80s. I think it was 1990 when we left. So there's three main areas that I experienced a lot of culture shock. The first one was timeliness. In the United States, it's expected that you'll be on time or that you'll let somebody know if you're going to be late. And also it's very much a let your yes be yes and your no be no culture. You know, you don't say you're going to do something if you're not going to, if you have no plans on doing it. You know, I mean, something comes up, that's understandable. But if you say yes, people expect that you're at least going to try. In Mexico, though, and again, this is how it was back then. It might have changed. But, you know, people, you know, if you're invited to something, they would, everybody says yes. You have to say yes. But when you're inviting people to a party or something or an event, you expect that about half of the people will show up. So you plan on about half. And people are always late. So you always tell people early, you know, before you want them to arrive, so that when they're late, they're actually on time. You know, it's such a culture change. And so I had a really horrible experience for one of my birthdays, my 14th birthday. I think either my 14th or 16th. I forget. Anyway, my quinceañera when I was 15. Oh, that was great. A lot of people showed up. But the other birthday party, we invited everybody from our church, the neighborhood, you know, anybody that we knew that I had made friends with, we invited for my birthday party. Most people said yes, as we expected. So we planned on about half of them showing up. So the day comes and we've got everything ready and I'm sitting there waiting for people to show up. And waiting. And waiting. And I was like, 20 minutes late, 30 minutes late, not a huge deal. But after an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and no one, not a single person showed up. I tell you, that was the worst birthday I ever had. Because that was a rejection from everybody. Not just the people who couldn't make it. Those I would have understood. But when we told all the people that we'd invited that nobody showed up, they had all been counting on everybody else to show up. And nobody did. And it wasn't right. It was not okay at all. And I know that hurt me really, really deeply. One of many rejections in my life, and it just kind of compounded all of them. Kind of along those lines is keeping your word. Like I said, here it's let your yes be yes and your no be no. Down there, you might commit to do something for somebody, and it's just not a big deal if you don't do it. You ask somebody to do you a favor, and it's probably not going to get done. You can't count on people. These are people who say they'll do something and just don't. Excuse me. They say they won't do something, and they do. And, they just don't keep their word at all. I couldn't trust anybody. How do you develop trust when people don't do what they say they're going to do? That was really tough too. And then the third one, this is more one of my dad's pet peeves than something that affected me as much. This had to do with the quality of construction. So while we were there, we had a 40-foot RV with a fifth wheel that we had sitting on church property. And so we kind of became the caretakers of the church. So there was already a one-room classroom, and my parents decided that we needed to add to that. And so we built a second story, which is very common in Mexico. The building's not finished just because they put a roof on it. They usually leave some of the rebar sticking out of the top so that they can just tack on another layer, Buildings are just never finished because you expect to build on. That's just part of the culture. But and so we were building a second story, and stairs and everything, which was a lot of fun for me to see how they build things, in general, and also how they do it in Mexico. And my dad was just horrified at the shoddy workmanship. They don't build to last at all in Mexico. And these are things built of concrete and, with rebar and all that. And they don't make it to last. They use poor quality and poor materials, poor workmanship. It's just, they don't expect things to last the way that we do here. And we have a disposable culture, but oh my goodness, it's way worse in Mexico, or at least it was. I don't know if it's changed now, but that's how it was back then. And so my dad was just kind of horrified by this and would kind of rant and rave about he couldn't believe that how they just didn't do things right down there. He's like, I could make this last, 100 years if I wanted to, but these people, they're lucky if it lasts 20. But that's part of the culture. It's how they lived, and it worked for them. So so with these things, with this culture shock and learning a new language, I mean, the first month I walked around with pen, paper, and dictionary, and it was constantly asking people, what does this mean? What does that mean? How do you spell that? Where does one word end and the next word begin? Can you say each word by itself so that I can at least write it down? The rules of language are very simple in Mexico, but you have to know where's one word, the beginning and ending of one word versus the beginning and ending of the next word. So, it was a lot of work to learn a new language, to learn a new culture, to make new friends. And, somebody on the autism spectrum, it was actually easier in Mexico because I was the white girl. I was the novelty. I was, the one everybody wanted to be around because I was different in a good way. They highly, highly value white skin and blue eyes. And that kind of goes back to, the Spanish invasion and how, the white people were the gods, back then. So me with, white skin and blue eyes and freckles, and I know I don't look like I have freckles right now, but in the summer I have more. And especially when I was spending a lot of time outside. But, it was a lot easier to make friends. But I was getting easily overwhelmed by things. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was already showing symptoms of borderline personality disorder. I was diagnosed with that actually just about 2 years ago. A year ago? Something like that. A year or two. And so I didn't even have any suspicion that I had it for a very long time, because the way I thought of borderline was, oh, that's the people who cut. And yes, over 90% of people with borderline do cut, and I don't. And so I never associated that diagnosis with me. And also that was it's the diagnosis that everybody's scared of. That, these are the most unstable people, these are the most toxic people, etc. Well, these are wounded people. These are people who have been hurt very badly in childhood and suffer from feelings of abandonment, feelings of either entitlement or subjugation. So entitlement is believing that I deserve everything. Subjugation is everybody else deserves everything and I don't. So they're kind of opposite there. A lot of other things. Everybody has filters through which we see the world. But for people with borderline, they're stronger. And that's just one of the many things. I want to kind of go through the diagnostic criteria. And there's a lot of medicalese, but I'll translate it for you. But I wanted to give you an idea of what symptoms I was already showing, how they were expressing themselves, and, since then, how I've kind of expressed it, and the prognosis and all that. So I'm going to use my other device to look up the criteria. It kind of helps to have two phones sometimes, even though it gets annoying. But anyways, so the diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder. So it's a pervasive pattern, and so pervasive means widespread. So it's a widespread pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects. Your affects are the way your face and your body language express your mood. So, and also marked impulsivity. Marked means that it's especially noticeable. So very noticeable impulsivity beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. So you have to have the instability and the impulsivity, and you also have to have 5 or more of these 9 criteria. Number 1, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. This means that, say for example, my friend is walking down the street and I see them, and they don't look at me, and maybe they're on their phone or they're talking to somebody else, or they're just in their own little world. They don't see me, they don't look at me, they don't say hi. Maybe I try to say hi and they don't acknowledge me. I feel abandoned. I feel like it's over. I feel like they don't want to be around me, and so I don't want to be around them, and so I call them up and I say how horrible they are, and or I beg them to acknowledge me. I beg them, what's wrong? Did I do something wrong? Why aren't you talking to me now? It's kind of an extreme reaction. And it could just be that the person was in their own little world. Maybe they had their earbuds in. Maybe they were on the phone and just didn't see or hear anything else. Things happen. But it's that real or imagined abandonment. And a lot of times it's really just imagined. And that's one thing I've had to learn. A pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. This is black and white thinking. So idealization means the person's on a pedestal, they can do no wrong. They're an angel. They are amazing. They're wonderful. They're the best thing that ever happened to you. And devaluation is, oh, they're a horrible person. I can't believe they treated me like that, and they're just shit, and I don't want to be around them. And it's those two extremes that cause the instability. But you also have the intense relationships, because we feel emotions very intensely. And so everything is extreme. I love this person. I don't just like them. I love them. I'm not just infatuated. I'm in love. It's like there's just no in between. And then 3 is identity disturbance. Markedly, so very noticeably, and persistently unstable self-image or a sense of self. So this is like, you don't know who you are. You don't know what goals you have in life. You're constantly changing how you think of yourself. This could be also the idealization of yourself and then the devaluation of yourself, black and white thinking. It's your goals are constantly changing. Who you want to be and how you want to be is constantly changing. It could also be that you're taking on the identity of the people around you, like a chameleon. I described myself as a chameleon from when I was in college. I wrote a poem, I Am Chameleon. I didn't know who I was. I couldn't figure it out. Everybody else knew who they were. I didn't know. I had an idea of, certain qualities of mine that didn't change. But I really just had no sense of who I was. I was too busy trying to imitate everybody else, trying to fit in. I just didn't know where I wanted to fit in either. 4, impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging, such as spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. And note, this does not include suicidal or self-mutilating behavior that's covered elsewhere. So People who go on spending sprees, people who are addicted to gambling or addicted to sex, substance abuse. I can clearly see that for me, sex is one of them. I don't think I had two areas, but definitely the sex. Once I mean, I didn't lose my virginity till I was 21, but I was already, I mean, it didn't help that I'd had people inappropriately touch me. It didn't help that I couldn't relate to any male person without thinking of them as a sexual being. It was just so difficult for me to think of men in terms other than sex. You know, even men I wasn't attracted to, it was, I would picture them with, their wife or girlfriend, and like, what do they look like when they have sex? That was a thought that repeatedly went through my mind. And that's not normal, really, for a young girl. I mean, at least not the women I've talked to. I don't know. But I know that as I got older, once I lost my virginity, I did engage in some unhealthy sexual practices. I didn't know how to say no very well. I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I didn't always insist on condoms. I had a lot of different partners. I've had, hate to say it, but I've had more partners than some men. And that's saying a lot. So that was definitely self-damaging. I don't really think that I had any other, really self-damaging impulsivity. Every now and then I would buy something a little bit out of my price range, but I mean, the most expensive thing we're talking about is $50. So it's not like I was spending hundreds of dollars that I couldn't afford. But number 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. Now, I didn't self-harm, but I was suicidal. The first time that I really truly felt suicidal, and I did a suicidal gesture, was in 1997 in college. That all my friends were busy with a couple of their people in the social group who were crashing. And even though my friends realized that I was headed towards a crash, they didn't have the resources to help me. And so nobody did. And so I didn't want to die. I was just in a lot of pain emotionally. That was the worst year of my life. And I'll talk more about what happened later, but I had a lot of bad things happen in a short amount of time. And that was the first time that I did a suicidal gesture. And the worst part about it was calling my mom and telling her what happened. Because I knew it hurt her, and I didn't want to hurt my mom. That's actually why I didn't go through with it. That's why why it was just a gesture and I didn't actually attempt suicide, because I couldn't stand to hurt my mom. And throughout most of my life, there have been a lot of periods of suicidal ideation where I've been thinking about it. And after my son was born, I repeatedly said that my son is my reason to live. And if it weren't for my son, I would probably have committed suicide a long time ago. And he's 13 going on 14 now. And he and my mom and my best friend are my reasons to live. Partners have come and gone. And so it's really hard for them to be my reason, because historically they haven't stuck around. Unstable relationships. And so that has never been enough to be my reason. My son, however, he needs me. My best friend needs me. My mom needs me. And those will never change. So those I can count on. And those are my reasons to live. But the thought's been there. Oh, it's been there a lot. And after my wife passed away, And the first friend I had made here in Iowa, the very first friend, it wouldn't surprise me if he himself has borderline. There's a lot of similarities, a lot of symptoms, and he did the go away, come back, go away, come back. I couldn't handle that. And I almost took a lot of pills. I really almost did. And instead, I told my best friend, I will walk through hell so you don't have to. And I checked myself into the psych ward. And having made that decision, that was my choice to live. And I got the help I needed. They only kept me overnight because by the next morning they were like, "Are you suicidal?" No. I was like, I already made the decision to live. That's why I'm here. And so it was just a matter of getting me the help I needed. So, number 6, affective instability. So affect is how you express your mood, right? So affective instability is that your mood, your emotions, and how you express it is constantly changing due to a marked reactivity of mood. Again, marked means very noticeable. So a noticeable reactivity of mood. So you might have, there's euphoria, which is feeling on top of the world. Dysphoria is the opposite. It's feeling that everything's horrible. So you might have intense dysphoria. You might be intensely irritable, intensely anxious. These emotions usually last a few hours, rarely more than a few days. And, sorry, alarm went off. So, you're reacting to external things, external events. And those reactions are very intense and they're short-lived. And it can change on a dime. I mean, any little thing and your emotions just change completely. One little bit of bad news and the day's gone. And you're just horrible. You're sunk in a deep depression. You can't pull out of it. And then you get a piece of good news and you're on top of the world. Unfortunately, the euphoria doesn't last very long. Unlike bipolar, they at least get to be euphoric for 7 or more days. But anyway, number 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. This is kind of harder to define, but it kind of goes along with the depression and feelings of devaluation, feeling that you're worthless. But for some people, not as much for me, but for some people with borderline, it's like their emotions get completely shut off. They have no emotions at all. They don't experience any emotions. It's like a sluice gate in a dam. How the sluice gate can be opened to let a little bit of water out. It can be opened to let a lot of water out, or it can be shut completely. And so for a lot of people with borderline, it's either all the way open or all the way shut. There's no in between. With me, I'm usually halfway open. That's my baseline. And then it's all the way open and then back to halfway. I don't experience it completely closed off and no emotions like a lot of people do. Sometimes I wish I did. It'd be kind of nice to shut it all off for a little while and not have to feel things. But that's not how it works for me. So, number 8, inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger, such as frequent displays of temper, constant anger, and recurrent physical fights. I've had anger issues since I was little. Just always had intense anger. When I would get mad, it was 0 to 60, and it's like just at the drop of a hat, I would get such humongous rage inside. I felt like I was going to explode. I just could not control it. I had no way of managing it effectively, and especially dealing with culture shock and a new language, trying to make new friends, and trying to find people who actually cared about me for me and not just because I was the white girl. All those things kind of contributed to my moods constantly changing, and the stress and the anger, and yeah, and then you add in Asperger's or autism overwhelm, and that's just like a snowball effect right there. That's a downward spiral that is just really hard to break out of. And you kind of have to wait until the storm passes. And when I would go from the intense anger to the crying, and then finally calm down and be able to think rationally again. But during those times when I'm overwhelmed and angry and all that, there's no rational thinking. It's just gone. And so yeah, that was very difficult, especially being in Mexico. And then number 9, transient, so it comes and goes. Stress related, paranoid ideation, which means thinking that people are out to get you, or severe dissociative symptoms. Now, the dissociative symptoms, I want to kind of go into some of those. One of them is called depersonalization. This is when you feel like your body is not real, or that your body is distorted somehow or altered somehow. Like you know that your body looks the way it looks in the mirror, but that's not how you feel like your body is. You might feel like you're taller, feel like your leg is missing, feel like you're fat, fatter than you are, or larger or smaller, or whatever. Or just that you just don't feel like you're real. You might feel like you're just a ghost. Even though people can see you and talk to you, you just feel like you're not real. Then there's derealization. And this is thinking that the world, or feeling like the world is not real. Or that the world is bizarre. Just that, like my late wife, Natalie, she would talk about how she often felt like waking life was a dream and dream life was real. And it didn't help that she had a recurring dream that progressed time-wise. And in that dream, she was in a hospital, and every time that the dream started, her friends and family members or doctors would be like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're awake. Now you just have to stay awake. You just please stay awake, or and it won't, and you'll be okay." Just whatever the dream was, supposedly illness she had, which is not a real thing, but in that dream she had to stay awake. And when she fell asleep in the dream, that was when she woke up from the dream in real life. And so people aged, people came and went, partners changed, family members got older and they changed their clothes and changed their styles. Like there was consistency time-wise in that dream. And so she often struggled really hard with knowing which was real. Which one, was she going into an alternate reality or something? It was very hard for her. And waking life often felt dreamlike to her. And that's really hard to keep a handle on reality when reality does not feel real. You can also have illusions, which is misperceptions of existing stimuli. So it's not exactly a hallucination. It's kind of like your mind playing tricks on you. Optical illusions are where, the brain interprets things incorrectly because it's trying to make sense of the world. And so this is like that, but it's illusions that most people don't experience. And that one's really a little bit harder for me to identify with. I don't think I've experienced that exactly. Some people do have actual hallucinations with borderline. I don't think I have. Natalie, she also had DID, and some of her alts were stuck in, I guess you could call it an inner, almost dream world. It was her inner landscape, and so some of them had to be, I don't know, imaginatively coaxed out of that and into reality. And that was not easy. And some of them were stuck in flashbacks, actual flashbacks, where she thought she was somewhere else. And I had to slowly get her to trust me and bring her back to reality. And that was not easy either. I was flying by the seat of my pants there, and thankfully I flew. But I did want to point out, borderline and bipolar are a little bit similar, but they are not the same thing. So, for one, bipolar, the hypomania, which is like a little bit of mania, has to last 4 or more days, and actual mania has to last 7 or more days. Whereas with borderline, these unstable moods, the mood changes happen usually within a few hours, maybe 3 days. They don't usually last more than 3 days. Also, symptoms of borderline can improve over time, which is a very good thing. That means that there's hope, that this is not a permanent thing. It can be fixed. The prognosis is very good, and with treatment, symptoms can gradually resolve. Bipolar, there's no cure. The bipolar has periods of about 3 or more months, about 3 months usually, for both the mania and the depression. And so the person during those periods of time will look and act differently from their baseline regardless of external events. Whereas borderline, the changes in mood are dependent on external events. So that's a major difference there. Also, borderline is usually not treated with medications. Certain aspects of it can be, but a lot of times when people are misdiagnosed with other conditions, the medications that are prescribed don't work as well as they should. And it's because it's the wrong diagnosis. It's a different cause. Bipolar, it's all triggered by brain chemistry. And that's regardless of what's going on in the outside world. They can have, the most exciting events happening and they just are completely depressed. Or you can be in the middle of, very depressing events and just be euphoric. And so it's not at all dependent on outside events. Whereas with borderline, it's very much dependent on it. And bipolar is well regulated with medication, and you don't have the extremes if the person will stay on the medication. Of course, people with bipolar don't like meds, because once they get on their meds and get stable, then they're like, oh, I don't need this anymore, see, I'm fixed, and they get off their meds and then they go crash again. So I'm going to list some resources for borderline in the description of the video, so you can click on those and find out more information and find some resources and maybe get some help if you need it. And if anybody would like to talk to me about this, feel free to email me at emeraldmosaicfox@gmail.com. And please be sure to hit like, maybe give me a comment, something that you especially liked or that especially touched you about this video. Subscribe, and please share it with your friends and family. Who knows? Maybe somebody else will benefit from this. And if you would like to support me with a little $5 donation to help me pay my bills, that would be greatly appreciated, because my cats need cat food and cat litter. And it's, money's pretty tight right now. So if you'd like to donate, it's via PayPal at emeraldmosaicfox@gmail.com. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.